Order, order. Welcome to this meeting of the Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee. Throughout our British film and high-end TV inquiry, we've heard the importance of the industry having the skilled workers it needs for the future. And so today we're going to be investigating that in more detail with three different panels of very experienced and well-known guests. Before we begin, does any members have any interests that they would like to declare? No? In which case, I'm going to first start by introducing our first panel, and we have Georgia Brown, who is the chair of the ScreenSkills Task Force. We have Dr. John Wardle, who is the director of the National Film and Television School, and we have Sarah Wybury, who is the director of Skills and Workforce Development at the British Film Institute. You're all very welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm going to start the questioning with you, Georgia. What's the challenge that is being faced in the British film and high-end TV industry when it comes to skills? What are we looking at here, and what's your task force saying about how we're going to address it?
You all will be familiar with the BFI report from 2022, which stated that come 2025 there was a potential shortage of 15 to 20,000 crew. The market's in a very different place now. You've heard from lots of people saying similar things, so I'll keep it brief, but we've hit major economic headwinds. We've had a downturn in advertising revenue. There's been a massive retraction in the market, which is obviously limiting production. So we're no longer talking about a skills shortage, we're talking about a job shortage. And that's something that we recognised in our task force report and was really important for me when I came on board of this as a project. For me, looking holistically at this as a challenge, to date, one of the issues has been there have been lots of plasters, short-term reactive approaches to how we've dealt with the skills challenge in the UK industry. And actually what we need to move towards quickly is a much more sustainable long-term approach with how we look at this. We are an industry, as you know, that will have peaks and troughs. That's the nature of our business. So rather than constantly reacting to that cyclical nature and the fires at the time, whether you're in a peak or a trough, what we have to start doing, in which the report goes into talking through our recommendations, is looking at what would that sustained approach be like to sustain growth in terms of looking at the sector vision and the ambitions that people have for the creative industries, but also how to sustain careers for the freelancers that are the bedrock and the dynamism of the UK film and TV industry. So how the task force looked to address that, again, when we came in, we made a decision to broaden out the scope compared to what was discussed within that BFI report. So although that was very much focused on high-end and film, and we're here today talking about high-end and film, it's really important we don't eliminate the other genres. We have to look at children's, we have to look at unscripted. They are critical paths to working in high-end and film and television. And if we want a sustainable career base for our freelancers, they have to be able to manoeuvre and have flexible careers through all of these genres. So we broadened out the scope. We looked at physical production across all genres of television, film. And the other thing that we did was to take a step back again and think much more holistically. When I came into this, there were lots of data quoted at me in terms of, the percentage that might be needed to solve this challenge. What wasn't available to me was how much are we actually spending? Where are we spending that investment? And really importantly, to understand this and unpick what the solves could be for the future is what is the value impact of that money we are spending? And that became the basis of how we worked and operated throughout the kind of 7 or 8 month tenure of reviewing and up to publication of the report. And we did a bespoke investment survey across all of our task force members. It's the first time that's ever been done, which astounded me at the time. And we now have the beginnings of some really robust data that was incredibly stark and pointed to directly, okay, well now it's very clear why there's a challenge at mid to senior. We're only investing 27% of our collective investment is going to mid to senior. Well, that's disproportionate when I have the industry telling me that's a challenge. It's clear there's a challenge, and that's why we're not investing enough in that area. So it was a fantastic it was fantastic for the task force to be so transparent in that process with us. And it did show, by the way, that although we talk about it very negatively, the industry is investing a significant amount into skills. We're investing over 100 million at the point of 2022. That's over the 1% stated that was needed. But again, it's not a money question. Throwing more money isn't going to solve this for any of us. We've got to start looking at how effectively the public and private sector work together to get more value impact for the money being spent and putting it into the right areas. And that's critical.
Very much. Sarah, can I just turn to you on that? We know the BFI published their skills review in 2022. But based on what George has said, what's the thinking now from the BFI in terms of how many skilled workers do you think the industry needs now but in the future? And whether that can possibly be delivered by the number of existing training programmes that are out there?
So the short answer to the first part of that question is we don't actually know. We actually need more data, more current data to tell us how many workers we now need. As Georgia has said, production isn't at the rate that we expected it to be when we first undertook the skills review. So really, I suppose there's an ask back, which is to support further data around workforce needs currently. We at the BFI are also committed to undertaking more skills research over the coming months and years, and actually want to make sure there's more current labour market information. And I think Laura Mansfield from ScreenSkills will talk later about the role that our skills body plays in collecting data too. So there's very much a need for further information there. Just remind me of the second bit of your question, sorry.
About the existing training programmes and whether it's delivering the sort of numbers that you're going to need.
I think there's real potential for what's in the system to meet our needs. But again, just building on what Georgia said, actually we need even greater intel to tell us what the most appropriate training routes are for the occupations that we need to train people for. So there are myriad interventions, there are myriad schemes. Some of those haven't necessarily been independently evaluated to tell us that they're the best possible routes for training people. There are other routes, I'm going to use the A word, the apprenticeships, that perhaps could be further maximised, which the task force report also speaks to. So until we have a bit more intelligence and greater evaluation on how well certain routes are working, we can't really make a firm decision about how to make the money work better and where to invest it better, if that makes sense.
When do you think you'll have that knowledge? When do you think you'll have that
So we are
information?
hoping to undertake more research over the next 18 months around skills. So I'd hope that that could be published by the end of this current spending period, so early part of 2026. I should also add that we have recently undertaken some pilot research around crew mapping, which is a starting place to help us understand at a more local level or regional level the skills that we have already in existence in a locality, and it will help us identify where there are further gaps. But we also need to work with a range of partners to broaden that work out and make sure we can build a picture right across the UK.
We hear time and time again on the evidence we've been taking that our skilled workforce is one of the key reasons that we attract this investment from, particularly from the United States, but around the world, to come and work here in the UK and film here in the UK. But obviously, we need to be doing everything we can to perpetuate that and protect that into the future. I'm wondering to what extent, John, you think that there is a proper awareness across the country amongst young people, amongst parents, amongst teachers, as to the level of opportunity that there is out there in this industry.
I think there's a growing awareness that the film and television sector's a proper business and that it provides real jobs. I think there's a lack of awareness about the significant difference in the types of roles that are available. So I do speakers for schools a couple of times a year, and you go through the credits with young people and you say, look, accountants, electricians, lawyers, as well as all the people that they can name. In fact, I start with saying, name some roles that it takes to make a film or television programme, and they talk about actors and directors and cinematographers and very, very little else. So there's a huge amount to do. I think it's a great thing that the BFI have recently tasked Into Film with providing that careers advice and guidance. And I think one metric is that there's this sense that you reap what you sow. I think this sense that if we had done this work 10 years ago, we might be in a better place now in people coming through in those specialist roles. So we need to take a long-term view, start planting those seeds, and they will pay off. It's really evident to me at the school. We'll get 400 people apply to be a director. we'll get 30 people apply to be a sound recordist. And yet if I was a parent, I'd be saying, be a sound recordist. There's so much work, you'll probably never be out of a job, whereas a director is a much more tricky path to tread. So we've got to do much more in telling people about all the great opportunities there are.
So you're getting out and about to Speakers for Schools, which obviously you can only do a very minimal amount of that alongside the day job. I mean, so what are the innovative ways that you've seen already or that you think should be employed in order to spread that word further? How do we get that message about sound engineers out to parents in, say, Newcastle, for example?
5 or 6 years ago as a school, we did no outreach, and so we now have an outreach programme. We reach about 6,000 people a year through a mix of attending kind of shows like the Pinewood Futures Festival, the Buckinghamshire Skills Show, but also putting on webinars that you can get a collection of, like a multi-academy trust to tap into, getting our graduates to go out to schools. So, you know, somebody like Myriam, who you're going to hear from later, fantastic ambassador, graduate of the school from Slough, her doing stuff in the local area was really key. So we're trying to do as much of that as we can, working with local groups. But I think Into Film as a programme will try and, you know, again, you talked about the crisis. I think if there's the skill shortage, if there's a shortage, it's a shortage of long-term thinking. So whether it's about jobs now or about outreach to create people interested in jobs in the future, we just don't take a 10-year view. We don't take a 20-year view, and we then reap the dividends of that.
Now, are we seeing evidence that other countries are?
I don't know. I would struggle to give a definitive picture on that. When I go to the US, I think there's much more awareness about the types of jobs that are available. I don't know whether that's just because of where they're based, but no, I'm not sure. There's lots of people ahead of us in telling people what a grip is or a best boy, but we could be leading in that. And there's lots. I think COVID has created lots of opportunities actually, and webinars and online stuff which can scale is much more acceptable now than it was maybe 5 years ago.
And did you want to come in? Julie, did you want to come in?
You've mentioned some of the outreach you did there. Do you do any outreach to the northeast of England?
Yeah, so I went and visited Alison at North East Screen, and we're talking about the impact of the studio there. And I think, again, we've got grads in the area. So I wouldn't be able to say, yes, we definitely speak in these 8 schools in Sunderland, but we recognise that speaking UK-wide is a really important part of what we do. We've established hubs now in Leeds, Cardiff and Glasgow. We're looking at where the production kind of centres are and how do we wrap skills around that. And that's hence why I visited Alison to talk about what the studio might bring in terms of skills opportunities.
I knew you did that. It was just everything you mentioned was very southeast based.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
John.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm interested in exploring with you the question of people coming from more disadvantaged backgrounds and how they entered the industry, because I saw some Channel 4 research which is really deeply worrying, which shows what a tiny percentage of people from disadvantaged backgrounds get to enter the industry. I'm particularly interested in this because I'm first generation to go to university, and I got into the industry, but just in a really random way because somebody heard me speak and invited me to go along and present a youth programme. But that was good for me, but it's clearly not any kind of official route in. So I wonder if I can ask you, first of all, do you keep figures for how many people from more disadvantaged backgrounds enter the industry?
There is some data available on that. I mean,
what do they show?
The BFI has data linked to its own funding programmes about who we're benefiting. Obviously, we give out National Lottery good cause funding, and so public benefit has to sit at the heart of that, with a particular focus in our skills work around supporting underrepresented talent to make the step into the sector both above and below the line. We have some data through the Diamond tool that's used in
which
the
shows
sector.
What?
That we are significantly underrepresented in relation to those from black and global majority
What are the
backgrounds.
figures?
I'd need to refer back to those. In fact, I might have those in my notes if you give me a moment.
Okay, I'll go down the panel while you check back on that.
Yeah.
Well, what Channel 4 found was that only 1 in 12 creatives in TV and film are from working class backgrounds. I mean, that is absolutely shocking.
Well, according to the Social Mobility Commission, around 38% of the population identify as being from the lowest socioeconomic background. At the NFTS in
self-identification is a different matter, because lots of people don't want to self-identify as coming from, as you put it, the lowest social end. I mean, who wants to call themselves the lowest social end?
Yeah.
But
that number's quite high, isn't it? 38%.
It's up to people in charge of the industry to decide who comes from a disadvantaged background and then prioritise them, surely, which isn't happening.
So 38% is the national measure that the Social Mobility Commission have come up with. At the NFTS, we're at 17% in Beaconsfield, but we're at 30% in Wales. So we're seeing the benefit of getting out of our base in Beaconsfield into other parts of the country. We see that scholarships are the key to our making a change in that area. So we raise about £500,000 a year through a gala that we run. The Crown just auctioned off all the cars, props, costumes, and gave us £1 million from that auction.
So is this all working? Are figures getting better?
I would say I think they're getting better much slower than they need to.
From where to where?
So we've gone from 12% to 17% in 3 years. And we need to get to 38%. So we've got a long way to go.
Although,
what I would say is, I think to date there has been some excellence in this area. There is a lot of passion driving people wanting to improve these figures. When you look at the figures, the stark reality is we are not moving quick enough. Yeah. The reason that I personally believe that, having sat across the task force over the last 9 months, is we are missing, which is what we're now rectifying, a pan-sector strategic body who are the driving force of actually setting up a framework that will enable us to act as one voice, both to government and to outreach, to enable us to improve statistics like this. A great example of this, if I may, is the apprenticeship levy. It has been absolutely evident through the BBC, who released data showing that the apprenticeship levy is directly correlated to increasing our ability to have a more diverse pool of workers. It is an area of huge opportunity for us, and I know we'll talk a lot about the apprenticeship levy, I know, but it really is a huge opportunity, and I'm really optimistic about that, because if the public and private sector could find a way to come together on that and unlock some of these challenges around cost, structure, framework, that to me is the singular most valuable source of increasing.
We have a voluntary levy at the moment, don't we?
We do.
And what, 0.5% or thereabouts?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I mean, that's pretty half-hearted. What percentage subscribe to the voluntary levy, and what percentage choose not to?
I don't have that data, I'm afraid. We can follow up with that.
Does anybody know the answer to that?
Laura will know, who's on the panel after us, because she collects the funds on both.
So I would have thought this was pretty crucial. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you've got a levy and no one much is subscribing to it, it's a pointless levy, isn't it? Really.
We know how much is going into the levy per year. If that is
no, because I'm more interested in the percentage than the total figure, because that way we can compare with our competitors. Spain, for example, is a 2% levy. I know that Denmark is moving towards a 5% levy. So we're on, and they're compulsory levies, and we're on a 0.5% levy, which is voluntary. And the three of you don't know off the top of your head what it raises. So it's all a bit nebulous. Let's talk, before I hand back to the chair, a bit about the Anglocentrism and the London centrism of so much of the industry, which may have a consequence, I think, for people from disadvantaged backgrounds who are getting into the industry. I mean, it's striking, isn't it, that the so-called, quote, National Film and Television School is based in Buckinghamshire. For those watching who are not completely au fait with English geography, that's the very south of England, just outside London. So I have to ask, which nation is being catered for in the Buckinghamshire National Film and Television School? The website talks about developing British talent, but of course the British, so-called British Film Institute, is in the South Bank of London. You'd be forgiven for feeling you're a bit excluded if you come from the Highlands, would you not? Can I start with you, Ms Brown?
I mean, I can't comment on the NFTS, that might be better directed to John, but I would say generally the decentralisation and the move out of London is critical. One of the key recommendations from the task force from looking at the industry over the last 9 months is that its partnership is critical, working with the screen agencies to ensure there's local implementation, local strategy, that we have outreach is really important. Mm-hmm. They were a big part of the voice of the task force, and actually we're already making some significant moves.
It's not really happening yet, and the names, I think, tell a story, don't they? Buckinghamshire, South Bank of London.
Well, what I would say is the school was started by a Scot It's got a proud tradition of having Lynn Ramsey, Bill Forsyth, Andrew MacDonald amongst its graduates. And in the last 5 years since I became director, we've started hubs in Wales, Leeds and Glasgow.
Founded by Scott is neither here nor there. That's a bit like saying, Scotland controls the UK government because Gordon Brown was the Chancellor. I mean, he just happened to be born in Scotland.
I guess what we say, this year we've launched a thing called the Sean Connery Talent Lab, funded by the Sean Connery Foundation. It takes 30 of the most talented Scottish filmmakers across a variety of roles and works with them through a year-long programme to create a significant short film. We've gone out and raised that money philanthropically to pay for that.
Okay, final word.
So the BFI is committed to investing funds UK-wide and outside of London. Our BFI skills clusters, that investment is targeted at supporting the development of training locally, and over 60% of that investment goes outside of London into the nations and the north of England. Our BFI Film Academy programme targets areas of greatest disadvantage around the country, so young people who are disadvantaged and particularly from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are supported to make the step into filmmaking for the first time. Well, our data shows that the significant majority of BFI Film Academy participants are from underrepresented backgrounds across the UK.
Okay. Back to you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you very much, John. Georgia, just very quickly, 2 weeks ago we met with some of the inward investors and we were asking them whether they're spending this recommended 1% of their budgets on skills.
Mm-hmm.
None of them, I don't know if you saw that evidence, but most of them couldn't tell me.
Mm-hmm.
What does that say to you?
What I can collectively say is from the task force members, which was the investment survey that we conducted, which included the major studios, so a lot of the inward investment coming into the UK, collectively we're spending more than the 1%, so over 100 million a year. What I would keep going back to is it's not a percentage question, it's not a money question. Throwing more money isn't going to solve this. Yes. It will exacerbate the problem. What we need to do is fundamentally reorganise how we're operating to effectively deploy that capital in the right areas to get maximum value back. Because to be quite frank now, I think we're spending a significant amount on skills, and there are some incredible schemes and there's real excellence in this area, but collectively it's just not adding up to the sum of its part. It's not making a difference and it's certainly not happening quick enough, and we need some real momentum behind this. And the only way really to do that is to start to understand with better data, insight, a strategic body who can come up with a greater UK-wide framework whilst locally implementing and working with local bodies is where do we need to spend the money? What is the maximum value we can get to really start to supercharge this? Adding more money will not necessarily solve the problem, and that's my worry.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Jane.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm fascinated by some of John's questions about access from working class backgrounds. I represent Wolverhampton, which has one of the highest youth unemployment rates, and it is striking that in order to train at your school, the accommodation cost alone would completely lock out most Wolverinian young people. But I want to turn to mid-career sort of changing. Georgia, you've mentioned only 27% of investment in skills is going on that mid-career upskilling. Is this just becoming the workplace equivalent of stack 'em high, sell 'em cheap? Is it just get loads of people in and then they're disposable and we'll get the next range? How has it come to be?
Honestly, I don't think there's been that much thought behind it. As I said, this is a deeply complicated and incredibly fragmented world, skills. There are a number of different organisations, agencies, etc., all trying to solve for the same thing without any holistic data or mapping of what that actually means. And that means investment is going into the wrong areas. That's why we do need a greater strategic direction, which is what Laura, I think, will talk to you about. So when it comes to mid-career...
It's not a new problem, is it?
No, absolutely not.
How are we still so in the dark about it?
Because in my opinion, there isn't one cohesive voice of the industry. It's fragmented. It's been managed by lots of silos, and for the first time now we are coming together cohesively as an industry with one voice and putting together a strategic body, which will be the beacon of that. What I would say to mid to senior career level is it was really interesting to me when that data came back, because of course across the course of all of our focus groups and discussions, mid-career development came up a lot. You know, it has a huge detriment when you're promoting people too soon, and we saw that really exacerbated throughout COVID and that boom in the industry, huge impact on mental health. that has a huge knock-on impact on our ability to retain crew and real knowledge that's needed in the industry. What's happening personally, I think, is there isn't enough investment going towards the leadership side. People have very good knowledge of the on-the-job, what's needed. But when you're adding into that now managing other people, that's not something that's been supported, and that's absolutely something the industry are now taking note of. There's been a number of schemes even announced this week. But again, all these schemes are reactions, and we need a much bigger, holistic and long-term view of how to solve this. You know, I found it fascinating that 6 months of our time was spent discussing a hypothesis that there was a challenge at mid-level, and then seeing the data that only 20% of our money was spent there. You think, well, of course there's a problem. Why have we not come together before? Why have we not been collecting this data? We have to, with real urgency, set up this strategic body to start pulling this data to empower organisations pan-UK to be able to make better decisions and get better impact for that money, whether that's public or private.
Thank you. And John, you were a curriculum head before your current role. Are you getting messages from industry to say what your curriculum should cover? And do you speak to your students about progression?
Yeah.
You know, once you're in, what's your 30-year plan in the industry?
Yeah. So
what's happening there
I'm
now?
working with the industry. We've got a 95% graduate employment rate within 6 months. So people get a job in the area that they've trained. So we know we're meeting a skills challenge. We're now working much more collaboratively with it to develop a production accounting diploma. It's not targeted at new entrants, it's targeted at people with an existing finance background who want to move into film and television production. So maybe you're an accountant for a bank or an insurance company and you now want to work on a Marvel project. So Disney pays 75% of the fees for the students doing that course. It's part-time, online. They provide a work experience placement. And we've got multiple examples of those.
They're already in the industry?
They're in an adjacent industry like insurance, and they want to move into film and television. So they've got a finance background, but they've got no film and TV experience. Okay. So Disney pay for them to effectively transfer. And they want people who can read a cash flow, know what a profit and loss is, but don't know what a location budget looks like or how to pay the above-the-line costs. So they pay 75% of the fees, they offer them a guaranteed work placement, and Disney's view is we need to grow the pool of production accountants. And I think that's a relatively new phenomena for me. I've been in education 20 years. It's only in the last 5 I've had companies coming to me saying, we'll pay for this. So I've got that with post-production supervisors, script supervisors with the BBC. So lots of industry partners where they're coming and saying, this is our skills challenge, we'll help pay for it.
And are any of your training models working with people part-time on, like, because that seems like quite
the accounting
a reasonable
one's part-time.
route, but not for people already doing something on a lot in a film studio?
Well, we have a whole other set of courses. So we run a short course portfolio which works with about 2,300 people a year, 1,000 people in Beaconsfield, 50 or just under 1,500 across the UK. And that's people coming to us and saying, we want to know more about this particular camera, we want to know about this, game engine technology, artificial intelligence. So we're probably one of the biggest providers of CPD. I think the biggest challenge is if you're a freelancer, you have to give up earning a daily rate to do that course, and you have to pay for that course. And that's where ScreenSkills has played a really valuable role in terms of providing bursary money for freelancers to access those courses. So we rely on that because many freelancers will look at it and go, well, we can't pay £300 for a 2-day course, but we'll apply to ScreenSkills to cover the cost. So bits of the system do work, and we need to push into those bits.
And knit together perhaps a little bit better. And Sarah, can I ask you what the BFI's plans to address this kind of progression in mid-career? What are your thoughts?
Above the line, we already have a programme on our own productions called Step Up, which is about supporting talent to progress into more senior roles. We, through our cluster programme, our skills cluster programme that is delivered across the UK, some of our clusters are upskilling existing workforce in relation to specialist skills. So, for example, in Northern Ireland and Scotland, there is a focus on supporting existing workers to develop virtual production skills, where we know there is a shortage. We have recently launched our Good Work programme. A delivery partner for that will be announced in the coming weeks. As part of that, There will be free to access management training for those who manage people, as well as leadership support and training, to speak to George's point earlier, and other transferable training. But we also have to recognise that at the BFI, because what we're using is national lottery funding, there are obviously rules around that funding and what we can do with it. I think there's a broader sort of need here around creating professional development frameworks for our industry. We don't have those, and so benchmarking around occupational competence at all levels is not consistent or necessarily clear. So I think we would also advocate for working in partnership and particularly with ScreenSkills, the skills body, to develop some continuous professional development frameworks for our industry, because we don't have that at the moment.
No, I was a freelancer for the whole of my career, and it is that if you're not working, you're not earning any money. So should the onus not be on the studio while people are working in the studio to be upskilling people while they're
Warner Brothers have made a really interesting move in that area this year, which they could probably talk to you about. They've set up a thing called Crew HQ. So they've created a training centre within Leavesden Studios, where if you're on a project, you can go at lunchtime or after the show and do something. We're a bit involved in delivering training as part of that. And I think that's a really interesting model, because you've got a captive audience on site. How do you invest in them before they move on to another show?
I think that's really interesting. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you very much, Jane. Let's move on to Damien, please.
Thank you. Can we move on to the formal education sector, the schools and universities? I note that the BFI report said that 66% of the workforce holds a degree, but that degree programmes are not adequately training individuals for the jobs we need people to do. So there's clearly a mismatch there. Georgia first. What as a sort of general thing, what would help educational providers at all levels, both schools and universities, to deliver more useful skills for the industry?
HEFE was a key strand as one of the subgroups that we ran throughout our task force, which John was on, so he can probably talk in a bit more detail to that. But I think, interestingly, they struggle in the way that we have struggled, which there is no governing body or strategic voice talking on behalf of everybody. So it's very fragmented, as is our industry. I'm sure from an HE perspective we seem fairly impenetrable, and vice versa, and that causes issues just in having an actual sit-down conversation at a level where you can be talking on behalf of an entire industry and education. I would say there's a lot of outreach, as John's talked, in terms of going directly to schools, to different education providers. I work a lot with Bournemouth University in terms of looking at their programmes, but at the end of the day, our survey was very clear in the data that it showed us that the industry values work-based training, and they want people to be kind of set ready. And a lot of the courses obviously are classroom-based, and that doesn't necessarily set up young folk coming into the industry to be ready to go onto set and understand set etiquette and therefore flourish. And I think there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done there. HE is a much longer term strand that we need to deal with. In fact, we've continued that workflow going, so we haven't shut that down. We're continuing to do that beyond the scope of releasing our report, to find solves, working with people like Nahimi to come together and understand what can we do to engage better, to partner better, and so solve both of our prospective issues, because we're so intrinsically linked.
And does the same apply at FE at the sort of sub-degree level?
It's slightly different, and again, therein lies the problem. It's a lot of fragmentation and different challenges applying to different institutions. But that is, I would say, again, coming into a much longer term challenge, and we need to start putting the groundwork in now. And it really is all about partnership, having much more open communication and a much more cohesive dialogue across the whole of the industry and the education sector, and how we can tackle that.
At the moment, you've got two sort of amorphous masses unable to communicate with each other.
And it's very challenging. But, the task force has always started to pave the way for that. It's, and John, I don't know if you want to talk more about the work that you were doing as part of that strand. It might help clarify.
Just before we talk about universities, I'd just say this all starts a lot younger than that. Mm-hmm. And it's really critical that the work Baroness Bull is doing on the cultural education plan is finished, supported, financed, because if you look at what's happened with music education, it's been much better supported, and there's much more provision in that area than there is for other creative arts subjects. So I think That's critical because students are now not getting exposed to such a wide range of kind of cultural, creative practice as they used to. And that will have an impact on who then applies for FE courses, who applies for universities, who then wants to work in our sector. Coming on to universities, I think I would say that universities provide a really... Firstly, there's not a problem of recruitment in film and television courses in universities. They're very popular. Thousands of people want to do them every year. They provide a really valuable space for students to explore different roles. Do I want to do sound? Do I want to be a director? Do I want to do editing? To find collaborative partners, creative thinking and problem solving. The big problem is, as Georgia said, is connecting that with the workplace. And I think industry has to step up in that as well. You know, things like work placements. When I was at a university before I was at the film school, helping a student get a meaningful work placement for 4 weeks was incredibly difficult. Whereas I'd look across to my colleagues in business and they would have integrated degrees where people were going off for a year. That just doesn't exist in our sector. And it all spins off the fact that it's a freelance, fragmented, pop-up production sort of industry. So it's incredibly difficult to marry work experience with jobs. But we've got to solve that, and I think a spirit of partnership is the key. I think traditionally we've done kite marking and accreditation. We've not done how do we help you make your course better, like really get involved and offer work experience and speakers. And
it also goes to the geographical diversity point, doesn't it? That if the industry wants people to have had at least a work placement experience, then particularly for 16, 17-year-olds, that's going to have to be near where they live.
Yeah. Although I didn't answer part of the question earlier that was asked, which was about how are you preparing graduates for the world as it is today. I mean, I'd just say broadcast and streaming is not the only game in town. There is a huge diversity of work around branded content, online advertising. So we talk to our students about the world as it is today rather than what it was 10 years ago. So if you're in Bournemouth, there is a huge advertising community there, lots of online developers. Work experience might take a different form there to what it might take in Manchester or Bristol.
Could I just add to that as well and say further education is really, really well placed to support the development of skills in our craft and technical roles. We have myriad further education institutions right across the UK who deliver carpentry courses, electrical training, etc., that don't talk about the application of those skills in our sector. We need to change some of that to make sure that when we train people in those fields, we're also helping them understand how they can take those skills and apply them in this industry. Same with accountancy. Production accountancy is one of our biggest skill shortages, as you've already heard. I think the broader piece about specific technical and occupational training versus broader training for inquiry, we need to understand the difference and the purpose between the two, and I think sometimes we merge the conversation. So I think there's real opportunity to develop some more higher level technical provision that doesn't necessarily need to go to quite the level of difficulty that our undergraduate and postgraduate degrees go to in some instances where we know we have occupational need. We don't need that level of training to train people well. What we need is consistent standards and understanding about what defines occupational competence per occupation to help shape training for that.
And are we getting to the point where if you have, it's like say in Bournemouth, a university that specialises in the creative sector more generally, that you get a cluster around it? Are you having that kind of bent? Is that happening anywhere else?
We obviously the BFI, I think you're aware, has invested in skills clusters across the UK. They are in areas of the country where we have major production happening and where further production growth is forecast. Skills clusters are tasked with working with multiple partners in their area, including further and higher education institutions, to try and improve the provision that is offered locally and also to create more responsive training in relation to the need of production in that area. In turn, what clusters are also working to do is support a much greater diversity of talent from within local communities to train and progress into below the line roles in production where we need them.
Don't let Julie talk about Sunderland.
Yeah, Julie.
Thank you. I love the way my city keeps getting mentioned. It's wonderful. I want to move on to apprenticeships, which I know a few of you have alluded to so far. Sarah, how could apprenticeships fit into the picture of training for the UK workforce, and what changes need to happen for this to be a reality?
You know, the structure of apprenticeship training is sound as an actual training route, that 80% on the job, 20% off the job training mix. There have been challenges with the delivery of apprenticeships in this sector because of our transient working patterns versus the structural rules that apply to apprenticeships and the continuous 12-month employment rule. We're delighted to be working with Myriad Partners, the Department for Education in England, to pilot portable apprenticeships. That's just in development at the moment, which will enable apprenticeships to be used in line with shorter term working patterns.
How would that work?
So what it will enable is the recruitment of apprentices on a short-term basis in line with the reality of when work is available, and it will allow people to build up their skills on the job in line with the reality of when work is available, and it will waive the minimum 12-month continuous employment rule, which is what our sector can't commit to. And we're really delighted that the DfE is supporting that change. John at NFTS is also looking to build on the flexi-job apprenticeship agency model, which does still meet and require the continuous 12-month employment rule, but through multiple placements. So the portable model is just one flexibility on from that model. But what we hope, I mean, we're still designing the pilot with industry at the moment and with ScreenSkills, but what we hope is that it will enable greater use of the apprenticeship training route. We do also, in fairness, need to make sure we have specialist training provision and providers available to support apprenticeship delivery so that the off-the-job training is sound and relevant. And I think the more we can do to support industry to get involved in designing, developing and even co-delivering that off-the-job training, the stronger we can make our apprenticeship provision.
Thank you. And Georgia, you've mentioned apprenticeships as being a huge opportunity, and Sarah's already said some of the changes that working with the DfE. If you had the ear of the Department for Education, what changes to the apprenticeship levy would you recommend?
I think obviously Sarah's already alluded to the structural issue that we face around SMEs providing continuous employment, which is a real challenge within our industry. Relevance, they're not training for the skills most needed and valued in the way that we need. Accounting is a really good example of that, and production accounting. And the thing that I don't think is discussed enough is the actual cost of them. Particularly in moments like now, we're going through a really difficult time as an industry. We are an industry which is propelled by the SMEs, and it is too hard and too costly. The employers cannot afford the costs associated with the apprenticeship structure as it stands. And I think, throughout all the work we've done over the last 9 months, the reason I'm so excited about apprenticeships is I do think if there's a way that government and industry could come together and have a really meaningful discussion around, are there steps that we could take to look at a reform that would make this a kind of fit-for-purpose structure, an apprenticeship levy for the industry, we would unlock...
What were you talking about?
Exactly what we're talking about, the structural issue in terms of the continuous employment. In the nature of our business, just isn't possible for many people to access. SMEs cannot access this apprenticeship levy. It's too costly for them. They can't afford it. The associated costs, which aren't obviously discussed quite often around wages and the support that has to go around having an apprenticeship, that's somewhere I think the industry could come together with government, have a discussion around costs and how do we tackle that. Because I think if you unlock that, where I'm excited, I think the industry is so optimistic about this, is we could unlock some of our skills challenges at such scale. And we really welcome the changes that have been made. Increasing providers like John has been fantastic. It's not solving the problem at scale. Apprenticeships have a direct correlation to increasing the diversity of our workforce. As John was speaking to earlier, this is a huge problem for this. And if we unlocked this, it really would be quite game-changing.
Can I clarify? You're not suggesting that people doing apprenticeships shouldn't be paid?
Oh gosh, no, quite the opposite. It's the SMEs, that the employers, the employers cannot, in a world of, and it does work for some people. There are bigger organisations, the BBC, who can offer continuous employment, and it could work for them. But as an industry that is majoritarily made up as a project-based freelance workforce, which is often propped up by smaller SMEs, it's just not possible for them to burden some of these costs, and that's what we've got to really come together and think about.
Going off at a sideways thing from something you said before, you've mentioned this strategic body a number of times. Do you foresee that this strategic body would have local flexibility with it?
I think it's more than local flexibility. My view is it is decentralised. There should be no centralised power within a strategic body. What they're simply there to do is to garner data, insights, to be providing a framework, to partner with local agencies across the breadth of the UK to help them put their strategic frameworks in place. It's not for that body to tell organisations or local agencies how they should be spending or where, but they can provide the insight and data holistically to help guide them, and I think that would be very empowering.
John, Chris Bird from Amazon called for high-quality training providers to be incentivised to provide apprenticeships. What support do you think is needed, and what would encourage other providers to get involved, do you think?
It's so tricky. I've been involved in education 20 years, and I think the last year of working really hard to get an apprenticeship provision off the ground has probably been the hardest thing we've done. And why is it so hard? Well, you're meeting rules and regulations from both the ESFA, from Ofsted. Some of those rules feel rather odd. So just to give you an example, for every tutor we bring in on our production management apprenticeship with Amazon, we have to do a whole series of social media checks about them. I don't do that on any of my BA courses or MA courses, but it's a requirement for Ofsted that you do that work where you can evidence that you've done all those checks on every guest speaker that comes in. So that's just one example of the myriad of kind of additional regulations and rules and bureaucracy that gets put around delivery. So where we've ended up in the market is private training providers trying to meet those rules and obligations. So maybe 2 or 3 people in a private training business trying to navigate all those rules and failing sometimes, or not having the breadth of specialist tutoring expertise. So in one hand trying to deliver production accounting, and then another trying to deliver production management, quite different things. And universities disinterested in it because there's not enough money to incentivise them to get involved. So they look at it and think, all these rules, all this regulation, all this risk, it's a big risk for us that we might join a sector and, you've got to then pass your Ofsted. You don't want to fail. We don't, as a higher education provider, we're not covered by Ofsted until we do apprenticeships. So I just think lots of people have just gone too tricky, too difficult. But because we're partially funded by the industry, our board took the decision 18 months ago to really go for it. We've put a huge amount of resource into it. We now have a pilot programme with Amazon, which is just about to enter year 2. We've got a new apprenticeship starting with the BBC in September. We're talking with Disney, with ITV. And I agree with Georgia, we're on our own not going to solve the scale problem, but if we can get to 100 apprentices, that's quite a big proportion of the apprentices in the film and TV space. I think there's only about 600 at any one time. So if I can, as my institution, contribute 100, 150 people, it would be a big boon. I'd also just say quickly that we go back to the levies that I talked about previously. People are paying a production levy. They're also paying into the apprenticeship levy and seeing nothing back from it. There's about 23 million that gets paid in by film and TV companies annually that just doesn't get used.
So how would you see the apprenticeship levy being reformed to assist with the issues in your industry?
So there's things that Sarah's talked about in terms of the portability and the 3-month structures, and then I think there's a genuine question about if you're not working with under 18s, do lots of these rules around apprenticeships actually apply? I understand there's safeguarding requirements if you're working with under 18-year-olds, and there's some of that with adults, but it's designed in the most labyrinthine, bureaucratic way, and the guys at the DFE are incredibly helpful in navigating you through it. But we're an organisation that can resource that to a certain extent. I think a lot of people just look at it and go, this is too difficult.
Do you want to come back, Sarah?
I think if we can make apprenticeships work well structurally for this sector, then there's scope for us to better maximise use of the apprenticeship levy. There is also scope for further flex in the use of that levy, just going back to the issues that we discussed earlier around professional development. And actually, if the levy could be split or further flexed to also invest in continuous professional development interventions that are potentially shorter and sharper, if we had a continuous professional development framework for our industry and we knew how to benchmark training, if that levy could also be invested in supporting CPD interventions that are structured and still validated in the same way that apprenticeships are and other formal training routes are, then we also have the potential to make the levy work much harder for our industry, result in better outcomes, whilst also making sure there's sort of quality standards in place for training in the industry as well. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Julie. Thank you all so much for appearing in front of us today. Were there any points that you wanted to make that you haven't had the opportunity to raise with us so far, Sarah?
I'd love to. I think Philippa and Marcus will talk a bit about this later, but I think it's also really important that we understand in this mix the impact that some of our working conditions have on retaining people in the industry and how important it is that we look at that in this mix. But as I said, I suspect Philippa and Marcus will talk about that a bit later.
No, I think we've covered it. I think my own plea is that we need to move away from this sort of feast and famine approach and focus much more on long-term thinking. And for me, the critical thing is I'm training people, they want to work in our industry. What is the pathway through? How do they leave and establish their careers? At the school, we're very fortunate that we have great professional relationships. We're able to leverage those. But for lots of young people, they look at it and it feels incredibly impenetrable. And I hope that the new independent film tax relief will create a whole series of productions at a different tier that will create entry routes in for young people and for people looking to transfer careers and change what they're doing.
Nothing, just to say, I really think if we can find a way to partner better between public and private investment and how we invest together, how we work together, to have maximum impact and effect for the money we're spending, it would go such a long way. And one last request, because you talked about the tax credit, I would just say, I think you mentioned at the start, inward investors are here because of our fantastic crew. They are, but let's not kid ourselves. They're also here because we offer an incredible economic position for them to come into. And, I'm conscious going into a general election, that continued support from the government in terms of that tax credit is incredible because it does stimulate production, and that is the production spend is what pays for skills. So anything that's detrimental to that in the future is a concern for us, and that continued commitment to maintaining the tax credit as a direct correlation to funding skills is really important.
Thank you very much. You've all landed your points very well today. I'm going to now move on to our second panel, so you're all free to go. Thank you. Can I invite our second panel to come forward, please? From the start. Might just go straight. I'm just going to go for it. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. So our second panel today is Laura Mansfield, who is the Chief Executive of ScreenSkills. We have Dominic Unsworth, MBE, who is the Chief Executive of Resource Productions. And we have Myriam Raja, who is the Lead Director of the latest season of TV BAFTA winning Top Boy. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today. I just want to kick off very quickly, Laura, with you. We've heard from the BFI that they don't have data on the sector's skills needs. I know you're new in the role, but surely that is the very role of ScreenSkills. ScreenSkills should be able to provide us with that sort of data on the skills and where the need is. Why don't the sector have that overview, and what have ScreenSkills been doing over this period?
Thank you for the question. I just, as you said, I'm new in the role. I just joined in January, and the degree of urgency of attacking this issue, because it's so important to the industry, is something that I'm very, very conscious of. Certainly, I absolutely welcome the work of the task force that has identified that there is a real need for that central strategic body, and that a need for us all to work together to gather that data and to be able to share and disseminate it, and for industry to have come together and supported that. Certainly to date, ScreenSkills in the past has pulled together considerable amounts of data, but it may be partial. For example, the High-End TV Fund brought out data last week about skills gaps and shortages, but they're focused on that area. And what we need to do now is look at consistent year-on-year data that speaks right across the piece and looks at not just skills gaps and shortages, but where investment is going. As Georgia said, for the first time, the whole industry came together with the task force about identifying how much money was going into skills and how much investment there was right across the piece. So now there is an opportunity for us to put together really consistent data to inform investment decisions, not only by companies and indies, but also investment decisions from freelancers and individuals about where they want to put their careers and put their energy. So looking forward, that's absolutely the role that we see as really important for us to take.
John.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much indeed for joining us. Could I ask you a little bit about decentralisation, and perhaps I can come to you, Ms. Mansfield, first of all. There's a problem, isn't there, with a London-based organisation in charge of an industry that's being run by a whole series of devolved administrations. There's a separation, and when I talk to people in the industry in Scotland, they say repeatedly that they don't really feel represented in the way that perhaps you think they would like to feel.
I think there's a number of points that you've made in that question that I'd love to unpack. Certainly the base of ScreenSkills is in London. However, we have a workforce and representation that is right across the whole of the UK. As someone who enjoys working in the office, I can see that I have teams spread right across the UK with representatives in Scotland, in Northern Ireland, in Wales, and right across the UK. We also have working groups within the different skills funds who are based, again, across the UK and in all the nations. So I think that's one point that it's very keen for me to make. The second point is we're not in charge of the industry. I think that's a really, really important point to make. What we are doing is hopefully looking forward with this new strategy from the task force, is putting ourselves into a position to be able to facilitate partnerships and facilitate collaboration between public and private, between different organisations, to ensure that people are working together and sharing what their skills needs are, sharing what they're doing, so that together we can put together a map of where that skills provision is, where those job opportunities are, and then lean into what needs doing in different areas.
Okay, can I just, because we were phoning around, my office was phoning around asking leading figures in the industry before you appeared about what they felt was happening and how well the system was working. So here's what one said. The one-size-fits-all approach centred around a London-based organisation like ScreenSkills doesn't work, because it doesn't recognise the devolved context for developing skills, and that is a significant problem in terms of enjoying trusted relationship with local crews, facilities and producers. And I'm hearing time and time again that the skills cluster approach is one that people appear to prefer because of the funding mechanisms and also the importance put on decentralisation. How do you counter that?
don't think that those points are necessarily mutually exclusive. I think that we can both acknowledge the real value of skills clusters and of a localised approach, particularly in relation to relationships with local education providers, with FE and with HE, and also a convening and strategic approach. Certainly, I don't recognise the one-size-fits-all approach. The way that the 5 skills funds operate is that each have multiple working groups, all made from industry, from on-the-ground practitioners in film and television companies across the genres, not just in film and HETV, but also in animation, children's and unscripted.
I suppose the bottom line is people think you're too remote, you're too centralised, and you're too London and Anglo-centric, really to be able to understand what's happening in the different nations. Not you personally, but your organisation.
I would hope that that's a myth that we can begin to bust, but I think fundamentally it's about working in partnership. And since I joined in January, it's those partnerships, it's those collaborations, it's working together to really hear what people's needs and where their investment opportunities are that we're keenest to look to do.
Okay, I know the other panellists have questions for you, so I'll hand back now. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. Laura, in the last panel we heard about apprenticeships, and ScreenSkills has led on the 2 government-funded pilots. What are the challenges of applying the lessons from those pilots to a national scheme that fits the needs of the industry and the government?
Thank you. So I think that there's a real, as Georgia said, I think there is a real opportunity with apprenticeships. They are proven to improve diversity in terms of entryways. Certainly the 2 pilots that we did, there was a greater diversity of people coming in, 20% from minority ethnic backgrounds as opposed to probably sort of under 18% for other sort of schemes and initiatives, and a really brilliant employment record afterwards, 76% going on to secure ongoing employment. So that as a pathway is a really exciting opportunity. It is, however, there are some issues. Previously, Sarah mentioned some of the challenges that are around the duration of apprenticeships, but it's not just the duration which is the key issue. There is also the costs that employers must bear for the part of the apprenticeship which is doing the training. So during that time, the employer is paying the wage of the apprentice, but it's also the pieces in between the training. So in the 2 pilots that ScreenSkills did, the FlexiJob apprenticeship pilots with lead partners, Amazon, Netflix, Warner Brothers and Sky, as well as a range of different independent production companies, the lead large organisations who had the levy needed to lean in further and support further costs, but for the smaller companies who were taking the apprentices for shorter periods of time, and that makes them as a structure really quite expensive.
So are you suggesting that the companies who have the apprentices working for them for these periods shouldn't be paying them?
No, I'm absolutely not suggesting that at all.
I don't understand what you're saying then. What, in bearing the cost, what are you actually meaning?
There's a range of costs regarding apprenticeships. So you've obviously got the wages of the apprentice, you've obviously got the potentially the additional top-ups that may be needed for them to travel to the training provider. You maybe have additional costs of administration and support around coordinating them. With the FlexiJob pilot, what happens is that you have a main employer and then the apprentice moves to different production companies during, because the lengths of the contracts may be shorter. And so those bits in between the placements need to be covered and paid for, where the apprentice may not be working. The off-the-job training needs to be covered, but also the administration in securing placements, in some cases supporting bursaries. Organisations such as Amazon provided extra support in terms of additional masterclasses. John made the point earlier on that the range of training providers is quite limited at the moment, particularly actually, in the north of England. There's a greater provision of training providers right now in the south and southeast. So really, for us to be able to roll apprentices out, it's about adding in flexibility in terms of covering off the job training. It's in terms of incentivising a broader range of providers to provide quality training, and adding all those different pieces up. But I think there's also a challenge in terms of communicating and decoding. Before I was taken this role, which is very new, and I'm playing desperate sense of catch-up, I've run an independent production company myself for the last 25 years. And in an indie, you are so focused on securing the next commission so that you can offer employment to people, that additional headspace to understand the complexities that currently exist of an apprenticeship system just isn't there, and the extra additional funding is often not there. So I think there's a hearts and minds piece that we can do too.
Who are you suggesting pays for these extra costs?
Well, I think we need to work together to potentially unlock some of that unused levy, because at the moment there is a considerable amount of the levy that can only be used for the training costs, and actually some of that money that gets returned to the Exchequer could be unlocked to add flexibility into the system and to really encourage greater take-up. I mean, if you look at the rates of take-up in the screen sector, there's 66 normal employees to one. It's a 66 to 1 ratio, whereas in, for example, building or finance, it's something like 27 to 1, but in the broader creative industries, it's something like 210 to 1. So screen is doing better than perhaps the broader creative industries, where there's another piece of work to do, but we could all go on a big journey to improve the number of apprenticeships for that kind of really broad outcome, and to improve the diversity of that as an optional pathway. It's only one of many other options, I think.
Dominique, I wonder what from your experience of working with the apprenticeship system, how can it be made better to work for the industry, in your opinion?
I think most people that know me and Resource Productions know that we're a massive advocate of apprenticeships. That's not to negate anything that's been said around the challenges within our sector, short-term working, contracts, productions ending. However, our organisation is an SME. We started off with just 3 employees and 1 apprentice. That apprentice, second apprentice, is now our head of production. So we are a not-for-profit. We do 50% training and 50% production, but we do produce content. And we have managed to utilise it. And I think one of the big challenges is raising awareness of the economic value of apprenticeships and the cost effectiveness. I think I've heard a couple of things this morning around how much it costs. I think when you actually are able to explain to hiring managers, which unfortunately we don't have in our sector, which is one of the problems, is the HR mechanisms that we use just are not fit for purpose, and that's a sectoral problem. We can't address both those things at once, where you're not able to explain to someone that actually trainees in our sector, for some of the big players, get paid around £700 to £800 a week. Now, an apprentice on the apprenticeship wage costs significantly less. So if you are hiring someone on a traineeship to work on a production that may last 3 to 6 months, there is an argument to say, do we need to do some work with our sector to say what are the cost implications of taking someone on a lower rate, which is a perfectly acceptable apprenticeship wage, and actually giving them meaningful engagement and work across a production supply chain over a 12-month period. And the portable apprenticeship model is one way to look at that, which we're exploring, as Sarah explained. The other is to look at ways of educating, upskilling, and using some of the CPD, lack of CPD that we have around training HODs, training small suppliers within the system to understand how to utilise what's there. There is a massive need, as John highlighted, around training providers and ensuring that Ofsted does not restrict some really good training providers that we have in this sector. But I think it's a threefold approach. It's around the training provision and how we free that up and looking at Ofsted. It's around making sure that people in our sector fully understand the financial benefits to their production and how you can manage the 12-month process, which Portable, etc. will help. And then there's looking at actually our sector as a whole, what are the HR issues and how do we hire and how can we improve that?
Thank you. And Myriam, as a freelancer who is built and is continuing to build your career in the industry, how important is it for you to be paid as you train, and how common is it for you to be paid as you train?
It's not really common to be paid as you train. I guess I'm in a fortunate place now with my career because I've done enough to get to a point where I feel secure. But it started a long time ago, and it started when I was 14 when I met Dom at Resource Productions actually, and I went to like an after-school film club, and from then on I took on so many schemes, I guess, or opportunities that were around back then that just aren't around now. And that was before even going on to go to uni. But it was important to have those for me to stay in the industry as I was trying to get a foot in. So, for example, after I'd gone to uni, I came back and there was something called iShorts, which was Creative England. There was Random Acts, which was run by Channel 4, and I got to do those two things that helped me make short films, and then I went to NFTS. And if those things hadn't been around, I wouldn't have been able to basically sustain a career really in this. So I don't know if that answers your question.
So would you see, we've been talking about apprenticeships here, which clearly weren't really in the ether when you started out, I don't think, in this industry. Would you see that as a way of helping people get into the industry and train?
I think maybe like I'm probably more a representative of people in roles such as director, writer, producer, so above the line, whereas I think maybe the apprenticeships work for skills training in other roles like John was saying about, sound recordists and below the line basically. But I do think for people, if you want people in roles like I am, there needs to be a different nurturing approach, and one of those is having short film schemes where people can go make short films, they can find producers to partner with, you make application processes and you manage a budget and you can afford to fail rather than...
You get paid while you're doing that on those schemes?
Not really. Yeah. You don't really get paid, but you get a budget to maybe pay a crew, right? And then you can hire your friends and you can hire people who can train up in short films, and it's less risk because you're just learning to develop.
How do you survive and live if you're not getting paid doing that?
Well, I lived at home, I didn't rent, and I did work loads part-time. I did loads of jobs part-time. So yeah, there's no point having opportunities if not everyone can afford to have them. Before directing Top Boy, I was a mentee on the first season, but for that they paid me. And they paid me what Don was saying is the normal trainee budget, but that money went towards me just commuting into London to be able to go on the shoot. If they hadn't paid me, I wouldn't have been able to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Myriam, first of all, I'd just like to say how much I enjoyed Top Boy. And I was at the TV BAFTAs the other week, and it was great that you won Best Series and Jasmine won as well. So you've already given us quite compelling evidence. So in terms of the fact that you just said about your short film, you can be able to make the short film, how much preparation did that give you to direct a TV series like Top Boy with a big company like Netflix?
So yes, me ending up on Top Boy was a culmination of so many things that had to be in place, and I feel like I had to work extra hard to get there. And like I said, it had to begin quite young, but if I hadn't done all those short films before even getting to the NFTS, I don't think I would have had a well-developed visual language and grammar and confidence. Then being at the NFTS is how I got my agent, who then helped me get onto Top Boy, and then I had to do mentee scheme, then I did 1 episode, and then it was 4 episodes. So this was me being at the BAFTAs was after 6 years of working with that production company and getting onto Top Boy, and before that even longer doing all these other schemes.
I grew up in Bectu and NFTS quite well, so how did that sort of NFTS Top Boy, how's that feeding now into the much bigger project of having to direct a whole film, a big feature film? So you're now taking this next phase.
Yeah.
So how's that experience prepared you for this? What challenges are you facing now that you hadn't experienced before?
I think
how did that prepare
there's
you?
still like a lack of, you still feel like a lack of security around your career. I also think now that I'm trying to write my own feature and develop it and get it across, when there's not many directors like you, you feel like a sole representative, and I think your projects get scrutinized a bit more. If we had like 4 other South Asians from various backgrounds, or if they weren't just British, they were Scottish, or then there's a variety of projects, and you don't feel like you have to be managing your career with as much scrutiny. But yeah, you do feel sometimes like I feel like it shouldn't be. I shouldn't be feeling so alone in that sense. Do you know what I mean?
Our first session with Gurinder Chadha, and she still says that even now she has trouble getting finance for films, and she has obviously made many successful feature films. You're not in her fortunate position. How difficult are you finding it to get finance, or you're not quite at that phase yet?
No, I'm finding it quite difficult. Like I'm writing at the moment, but I'm it's unpaid, and I haven't worked since last June, and that's me trying to make my first feature, and it shouldn't be like this really. But yeah, and I don't know what I would look to for like a training thing to help me.
In other cultural industries like music,
Yeah.
a band would get an advance to record the album. Is that something that you think about in the film industry? You should get some development.
You have development,
Yeah.
but it's still like not a guarantee whether you're then going to be able to make the film afterwards. And because my film is foreign language, it is set in Urdu and it's set in pre-colonial India, I feel like it's harder to get it across, basically.
Understand that. There's probably. I mean, anyway, I won't dominate the session. So, Dominique, how might small budget productions that have a training emphasis be incorporated into the BFI Skills Clusters programme? How do you think that could happen?
I think it's core. We Resource Productions leads the Berkshire cluster. It's another southern one, and I know there's always this thing of like, oh, it's the Shire, it must be lovely and really easy to get work there. We operate from Slough, which is the most diverse council outside of London, and that's the heart at which we propel all of our programmes from. And across Berkshire, it's a growing sector. We've got growing studios. We've got all of the majors, Netflix, Disney, and Amazon coming through. And we've been really fortunate in getting the BFI support, because that has acted as a kind of badge that we can then go out to industry with. And industry have responded exceptionally well. We've been working with the education sector through the University of Reading. We've been working with all of our councils through our film office that we run. We've also been working with Shinfield Studios, which are a brand new studio. And through all of those relationships, we've then been able to get Amazon on board. So with all of only then when you have those players like the Brave Film Studios, the Amazons, only then can you actually start to integrate training and production effectively, because you're there at the start of production, you're talking to the unit production managers, you have access to the jobs before they actually go live, and you can start to influence. So for me, the clusters are a game changer in our sort of micro locality. We are the smallest because we can start to work closely with those productions to tailor responsive training.
Just think about that you're in Slough, you're 10 miles from NFTS and 10 miles from Pinewood. Does that make any difference?
Yeah, absolutely it does, but you'd be amazed at how few people in Slough knew where Pinewood was, and no one had heard, practically no one when Myriam started heard of the NFTS, and we've been working with the NFTS over the years to make sure that happens. But it's also infrastructure. You have to think about localities, not just like Scotland, Ireland, Wales, where they've got their own challenges in those nations, but actually somewhere like Berkshire, where you've got rural West Berkshire at one end, you've got urban Slough at the other, and there is no bus to get across and there is no train. So there's one bus that goes from Slough to Beaconsfield. They looked at cancelling it. They've reduced the service, and it's impossible. That was crucial for Myriam to get there. For me, as someone that doesn't drive in the locality, to even get there, to engage with students, to help them get onto productions afterwards. So it's about a bigger picture than just, having the, amazing film school down the road. Absolutely. But if you don't drive and you don't have the money to rent in that locality, then we need to increase the accessibility from even local, hyper-local places like Slough, never mind Scotland. It's a big access barrier.
Yeah, look, you know, I'm an MP in Leeds now, but I was a teenager in Beaconsfield and know exactly the challenges of the bus service going to Slough or High Wycombe or anywhere, basically. Just finally on this question, Laura, we heard from Myriam about how useful it was making short films. Would a government policy to stimulate micro-budget film production be an effective tool to develop a skilled workforce nationally?
Certainly, having those transition projects at all budget levels are ways to really help develop skills, because skills development isn't just, as it were, formal training, it's very much on the job. And so the value of productions, whether they're film or whether they're television at different budget levels, gives ladder opportunities. So certainly I think it will be really interesting to see what the benefit is of the new tax credit in terms of the under 15 million films, and I think there's a real appetite to sort of see across the Film Skills Council the degree to that will make a big change. But certainly those sort of more micro budget projects, which is sort of under 1.5 million, where it's really quite hard to raise funding, but where they are a great opportunity to grow indigenous talent, you know, it could be a real area of focus. Certainly talking about skills interventions and talking about training, it is about those projects being available, but it's also about different schemes and talent progression that's offered. So in regard to film skills, there are projects, for example, such as Film Forward, which the Film Skills Group does, which enables people with several years' experience to make progression, and they're mentored and supported through that. And Trainee Finder, that enables people to be paid trainees on productions. So, for example, Trainee Finder has had, I think, 1,400 people go through so far, paid trainees on sets. For example, there were 10 on Top Boy in Series 3. So it's about looking at the whole range of initiatives and support right across the piece.
We went to Paris as a committee, and we met with Sensei, and they have a levy on streamers, and that stimulates domestic film production right across the piece, short films, feature films, etc. And they also have a quota for cinemas. We had the streamers in front of us, and I'm going to paraphrase them. They basically said that would just produce a lot of rubbish films. What's your view? Would bringing through, creating something like a streamers levy, which would create funding for development, for production, would pay people right through, would that help stimulate the pipeline of people from right across different backgrounds?
I think I'd go back to the point that Georgia made on the earlier panel, which is that there is already quite a lot of money in skills investment in the sector. So I think the first step is to look at joining it all up, looking at where it's invested, looking at where those interventions really make a difference, and then maybe taking further steps. But I think right now it's about having strategic alignment, coming together as a sector to look at how we can all improve what we're doing and improve the offer, rather than necessarily adding a further compulsory levy. I think, you know, companies already invest an awful lot of money and time and resource, but now we can come together and look at allocating it.
Start of the session. I'm going to move on to diversity, and I'll try and be a bit shorter. So we had the BFI, and they said there has been some progress, but the film and TV industry is still not reflective of the UK population. And we've, had figures such as that men dominate most senior roles, 74.5% directors, 67.3% of writers, and the number of women in senior roles actually fell from 50% in 2018 to 45% now, and similar figures in terms of BME and other underrepresented groups. So what impact has the Screen Industry's failure to recruit from diverse groups had on the economic health of the sector, Laura?
I think that the diversity of the sector is hugely important, and I think in a way we don't know what economic impact the the lack of diversity has had. I think what we do know is that our sector is incredibly successful, but imagine how much more successful we could be if we were more diverse and had more plurality of viewpoints, not just in front of the camera but behind. And certainly it's about, as an industry, coming together and keeping on making those efforts. I think there are two areas really, which is about making clear those access points in order to look at the whole piece of careers strategically. So we're looking at those pipelines. Are there enough access points to bring people from a diverse range of backgrounds into the industry? But crucially, once they're in, how can we ensure that we retain and develop those skills? So, I mean, certainly in terms of the skills funds, the statistics are pretty good. You know, in terms of 55% of the beneficiaries of the skills funds are women, 18% are from minority ethnic backgrounds, 12% disabled, but we can all do better. I think inclusive, Sarah mentioned it just right at the end of her evidence, inclusive recruitment habits, looking at how we educate not just our leaders and our hirers about how we can improve the way that we hire, the way that we promote, the way that we interview and advertise, and moving away to the degree that we can from some of the informal hiring practices. And that's about sharing best practice. We have some very popular e-learning right across the piece that offers insight into better working habits, that supports companies and freelancers to learn about how to structure an interview, all of those different kinds of things. I think so far 250,000 people so far have done e-learning through ScreenSkills since we started. So it is a considerable amount, and 27,000 last year. But I think it's about all of us working together to keep on doing better and spreading those practices right across the industry.
Myriam, when you come into this as a teenager, what was your view of the industry? What was your family's view? Did they think it was a viable career for you? Or did you have to persuade people that you should go into TV?
Yeah, I mean, so, definitely my parents were not really up for it. I was, my background is my mum was, my mum's a cleaner. I was on free school meals, and she brought me up and my brother, and we moved to Slough from Bradford, and English is not my first language, but I remember it was so I never even considered that this could be something I could even afford to dream about, and it was only through meeting Dom and going to this after-school film club and then being given, I think it was like £100 to go make a horror film, and then showing it to my mum, and the challenge began earlier because there was no one I could really point out and be like, this is what this career could look like. It was such an unknown. And it was important for me to have been doing it consistently so that then I could pick the right GCSEs and be like, can you let me go to uni to study this? It had to be a viable idea in her head beforehand.
I'm just trying to tease out what's important. So clearly after school clubs and programs important. A role model's important. Are you a role model now, do you think?
Yeah, I hope so. I went back to my school and spoke. Also, it's important to say I went to a girls' school that was predominantly Muslim, Asian. So it was also important that I go to an after-school club, and that's where I met boys to direct and talk to. And the industry is majorly male-dominated, but those skills that would have been lost came from going to an after-school film club. And little things like Dom meeting my mum so she knows where I'm heading, and Dom being like, okay, I can pay for a taxi for you to get home, it's fine. So it has to, I think, begin at school, because so many kids who would have been like me wouldn't even have thought that this is something they can actually think about. I think that is where it has to begin. And it has to be nurturing.
Dom, you clearly role model yourself in this regard, and I'm sure you've helped many other people as well as Myriam. We've had a lot of setbacks in the industry globally. We had the strikes, we obviously COVID. It is a precarious profession. It is a precarious industry in terms of you know, having to freelance, having to fund yourself between projects. So in that context, how can the industry persuade more people from Myriam's sort of background, people without a financial safety net, people without a background in creative industries, that they can have a career in it? What more can we do?
I think in addition to what Myriam said, the really important thing is to be able to work or model the working behaviour of being self-employed, of managing a production, of working on a production, of short-term work, and being able to have the multi-skilling ability to then go and work in a cafe or a bakery in those periods, and to evidence to your family, to your local community, that actually there is an amazing creative thing that you can be part of whilst actually earning other money elsewhere, and have this, what everyone calls the portfolio career, which most of us, myself included, that's what we continue to do within this industry, and that's what most people will always do within the creative industries. We're just very blessed to be in a film and TV element, which has benefited from massive inward investment from some amazing, you know, American production companies. And I think we've somewhat lost our way in terms of the programs that Myriam went through, and I myself went through as a young person, which enabled us to make low budget short films and to learn those multi-skills, to build the networks, to create our own infrastructure. You know, probably it was 6 or 7 short films that were publicly funded that Myriam was able to produce, and the skills and the networks and the evidencing to the community to learn how to be a freelancer is only made through that kind of managing money, making a project, raising for the next, which we kind of don't have there out in the ecosystem at the moment. So for me, that's the single most kind of useful thing, is to look at where did those programs go, because we haven't seen them really for the last 10 years. We lost the First Light program, which got integrated into film, which does amazing things, but it doesn't do what First Light did, which is give kids money to make films. We also had the amazing iShorts, iFeatures, Film London Microwave. Laura talked about the 1.5 million bracket. You know, we made our first feature film as an independent last year, which came in at about 1.5 million, with lots of favours thrown in. The key contributor to that was the Rothschild Foundation. That's the state of financing for low budget in the country. We're reliant on independent wealth and trusts to give it as a kind of donation. We do not have that pathway because it's been eroded from short film up to low budget. That's where the work is done. That's where you learn to work.
Thanks, Alex. Dom, can I stay with you? We've had a lot about the success you've had about attracting young people from hitherto underrepresented backgrounds into your programs and into your work. Are there any tips that you can give us that could be replicated across the sector and across the country that you've had success with?
Yeah, I'm hoping what we're doing through the cluster is modelling something that hopefully we can share more formally when we do our first report. But our model is really quite clear. 25 years we've been doing it since I set it up in 1999, and we know it works because we can see the outputs. And we've worked with all the partners you're hearing from today, from a hyper-local focus in understanding the community, being embedded within the locality, and the organisation having the autonomy and the power to look around them and physically have staff and freelancers that live in that community next to high levels of production. And that's the two, you know, components that you really need, and that's anywhere in the country. The models that we have, it consists of 4 parts. The first is youth engagement, which is where we started with youth clubs and film clubs and making films with kids and crossing over into digital media and the associated things. So we run Yes Youth Engagement Slough, and that does everything from sport to film. So you can find those kids that don't know anything about film and drag them out of the canoe and say, you're going to make a film today. So youth engagement is key for us, and parallel to that, the retention, the reskilling, the returners to work. So we have the Creative Collective, which engages people who think they might have a creative bone in their body but don't know where to apply it. And they may be 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and they come in as adults, and we now do the same with them as we do with the young people. Both of those feed into our training work, which we're doing through the skills cluster. And so we work with partners like ScreenSkills, like Creative England, like the Film and TV charity, and try and signpost and collaborate with existing provision, not creating anything new. Utilising as well amazing government programmes like the apprenticeship programme, which has standards and training we can use, like the boot camps which are being funded by the DFE, which I think are game changers for retention, and then also programmes like the DWP swap programme, which enables you to reach those that are hardest to reach who are long-term unemployed. all of those signposting into the existing provision that the larger providers work and helping people access them so there's an equal playing field. And I think that the last thing is just making sure that you're integrated through things like the local skills investment plan and formerly the local enterprise partnerships or the business growth hubs to enable people to develop in terms of the local area, the economy, the businesses that are operating there, and getting all of the local employers, whether that's Amazon or MBS Lighting, engaged in hiring everything that you've just trained up. If you don't have, the productions there and you don't have the supply chain there, you're training people up to then send them away out of your locality. So you need to build that ecosystem. But similarly, you can build a studio and it can be extremely successful, and the kid at the end of the road will never work there. So it is bringing all of the parties together. And the key key for us has really been running a film office. We set up Berkshire Film Office because no one else was actually managing all 6 unitary authorities in our area. Productions would come in and wouldn't know where to go. And that unlocked for us that relationship with industry, because suddenly we had the power, the councils had the power, government had the power to say you can or cannot film, and here are the requirements in order for you to use this locality. And then training can be embedded into that ask.
That's a really thorough answer. Thank you. Laura, moving on to you. So how are you signposting people who want to, so, Dom talked about there's the kid at the end of the road doesn't necessarily know what the opportunities are. How are you signposting people? The reason I ask is I went on your website and there's a page which says look for opportunities or vacancies, and you click on it and there's nothing there, which is a blank page. So are there plans to address that? Are there plans to better signpost people into the opportunities in the industry?
Absolutely. Since I joined in January, the goal is to be making sure that we are absolutely providing that pathway and that direction. I mean, across all of the activity of ScreenSkills last year, we supported 27,000 people, and 127,000 so far have engaged with traineeships, with mentorships, with support through work. So part of the goal is to make sure that there is a unified pathway to be working with Dominique, to be working across the landscape, because at the moment what we have is, a really quite fragmented provision right across the UK. And so that piece where we're providing not only a strategy but clear pathways towards opportunities, training opportunities, job opportunities, and aligning what's happening where in the UK. I can't speak to what that particular area of the website, but I can certainly have a look at that.
Having a look at. But you talk a lot about we're going to look at. Yeah, and when we spoke to you a minute ago about when Alex asked you about the levy, you said, well, I don't think we need more money. We need to come together. We need to look at how the money could be better spent. What I'm keen to know is a bit more, that doesn't sound like you're sort of gripping it. Who should be gripping this? Who should be saying, rather than looking at it, who should say, look, we're going to do this, we're going to bring together this group of people, these are the timescales, and this is when we want to have recommendations on the table. Is that your job, or is that someone else's job?
Well, we absolutely are gripping it, and we're absolutely gripping it in collaboration with the task force. As I said, I joined the organisation in January. We are in the process of engaging with the task force, with all of the different councils and working groups in the skills investment funds, together with the clusters and with the BFI. This work is ongoing. Part of the piece about taking it forward is working in partnership. And so, it would be all very well for me to arrive and saying, ta-da, I've got my own personal vision, but the point of this is to go on a journey together with other people, specifically to John's point earlier on, it's not about one person in London mandating something. This is about going on a really joined up journey. We are embarking on making some changes to our own organisation that will enable us to better be that strategic body and better collaborate, even more than we already are, with industry and with partners right across the piece, as well as committing to releasing a strategy later on in the year. We've committed to end of September that we will be releasing that, and so that's where this work is very much ongoing. Since I started, I think I've been to all 4 nations. I've met something like 120 different people, because I'm really keen to make sure that I'm really hearing from producers, from agencies, from streamers and from indies and right across the genres to understand how we can be putting this together to better pull together the picture. So work is very much ongoing, and
end of September we'll have a strategy. Because you talk a lot about a journey, but a journey needs an end point. So we
will have a strategy for how ScreenSkills will be able to speak to the broader needs of the industry and be able to be that organisation that can put together a pan-industry strategy that is accessible for end users and for people to really kind of get into.
That sounds like a lot of words, but what does that actually mean? By September there will be a clear strategy that has goals, that has targets, that has numbers, that has or a strategy that signposts to more coming together and looking at.
It will be a strategy for how ScreenSkills will put together that next strategy together with the industry.
So a strategy for another strategy.
It will be part of that.
Part of what? By September you're publishing a strategy which is going to look at another strategy.
By September we will put together a strategy for how ScreenSkills will be able to be that pan-strategic body and make the evolutions that the task force has suggested, and therefore be able to work right across the piece to pull that together.
Will it have objective? Will it have clear objectives in it? Yes. Will there be numbers that we can look at and we can say this is what ScreenSkills wants to achieve and this is how we're going to measure their success? Yes. Good. Thank you. Before we let you go, was there anything else that I should have asked you or we should have asked you or that you wanted to say, or any other comments that you think we should take to heart when we're compiling our own recommendations, Dom?
Just a quick one. I just flagged that there was the Random Acts and BBC New Creative schemes. It's worth noting they were funded by the Arts Council, and so the BFI does amazing things. One of the things it's not able to do is enable people to make lots and lots of films because it's not funded to do so. It's worth looking at the Arts Council model, whereby we're a national portfolio organisation. Actually, we're developing inadvertently filmmakers using Arts Council funding and programmes like Random Acts. There is some conversation that needs to happen there about what being a creative freelancer means, and it doesn't work in the silo of the BFI and the Arts Council.
Do you think that there should be a compulsory levy that goes into sort of grassroots film production?
I don't think there should be a compulsory levy. I think, as everyone said, there's lots of money in the system. That is not our problem, and you'll never hear me say I don't want more money. But on this occasion, it's about communication, structure, working together, and a clearer, targeted approach. That's what we need, and not necessarily a compulsory scheme of any kind that's going to further alienate any of the players that need to get together.
Who does that work? Who actually brings together? Because we've had a lot of people saying we need to look at this. There's a lot of money in the system. We need to look at how we bring it together. Well, who looks at it and who makes those recommendations?
I hark back to the old days of remembering, old enough to remember the UK Film Council, and that's what that body did. ScreenSkills took up the mantle of some of that work and did an excellent job for many years, and it's been challenging over the last few years, which is why we now, have Laura and a new vision. My hope is that that body will be able to be ScreenSkills, but it needs to be someone that is external to all of this, all of us bidding, all of us competing, all of us duplicating. It needs to be neutral and not delivering at the same time as coordinating.
All right, good. That's helpful. Thank you. Myriam, anything we should have asked you and didn't? Anything else you wanted us to say?
Not sure. I think we just need, more DOMs. I mean, honestly, it's more resources, and because it makes a difference, really, having, especially when you want to be a storyteller, writer, director, and when you have people making those works, you will, they will employ other people of diverse backgrounds anyway, like that will trickle down, but it's just having that change up top, really.
Thank you. Laura, I feel like I've put you on the spot quite a lot. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
Okay, it's always fun being the new girl. No, I think I just wanted to say that, I think that importance for us as an industry to pull together that data is massive, and that, sometimes data isn't the sexy thing, and it's not the kind of the poster child, and it's not necessarily always that easy to raise money against, but that kind of consistent data is what will really help inform us and help us all continue getting through the piece.
All right, thanks all of you for coming in today. Can I invite our final panel forward? Thank you very much.
What's that? Yes, I could slide some of it.
Thank you very much to our final panel who are joining us today, and they, I'm looking my right page. We have Philippa Childs, who's the head of Bectu, and we have Marcus Ryder, MBE, the chief executive of the film and TV charity. You're both very welcome. I'm going to start the questioning with John, please.
Oh, that was before I was just gearing up and ready to go. Marcus, can I start off by asking you about people leaving the industry, because that's a concern, isn't it? Is there a profile of people who are leaving the industry? Who is it who's going, and what can we do to keep them?
The short answer is everybody's going.
Everybody's going.
Well, it's cutting.
Cheer us up, why don't you?
Yeah, it's cutting across the industry. While we've been talking here, ITV has just announced that it's making 50 million in savings, and that's going to equate to, it's thought, about 200 jobs. Right? And so this is on top of the fact that it had a recruitment freeze before. It's on top of Channel 4's redundancy announcement, which was about 200 jobs as well. There are redundancies across Amazon Prime, there are redundancies across BBC. So there are redundancies across the board. If we look at freelancers, they aren't redundancies, those are people who are out of work. There have been some brilliant work by Bectu looking at the amount of freelancers who are currently out of work. The research that we've done is, as a film and TV charity, we're looking at it's disproportionately hitting women, it's disproportionately hitting people with caring responsibilities, it's also disproportionately hitting people of black and global majority. I can go on further with regards to the mental health effect that it's affecting people as well, which again disproportionately hits people from protected characteristics.
Okay, Ms. Childs, could I pick that up with you? What people tell me when I talk to them about this is that people are just scunnered with poor working conditions, and it's the work-life balance that's bad as well, and the uncertainty as well, which is the curse. Like my colleague, I've been a freelancer as well, and it's that business of the freelance life, isn't it, where you don't know what the long term is, which is also knock-on consequences for accommodation or mortgages and so on and so forth. People just get tired of this. Is this the fundamental problem?
I mean, I think it is a fundamental problem, and inevitably, that's tough when there's lots of work, but when there isn't any work around and people are really struggling financially, they're isolated in their homes and they don't know where their next job's coming from, then all of those things that are challenging in the industry, long hours, culture, bullying and harassment, problems with diversity and inclusion, they come into more sharp focus. And so, yes, our research, as Marcus said, I think I shared it with everyone on this committee actually, showed that in February, 7 in 10 of our members were not working at that stage. And so, not wishing to be too depressing, because yes, this is a fantastic industry to work in. It's a very vibrant industry to work in, and when things are good, then they're really good. But I think it would be remiss of me not to say at the moment things are incredibly challenging.
Very high figures, 7 out of 10. Are there any specific factors at the moment that explain that high figure?
It's a combination of things, I think. Obviously, I think post the strikes in the US, we all anticipated that things would get back to normal very quickly. That didn't happen. The challenges for broadcasters in terms of their income models have caused problems. The advertising downturn is incredibly difficult. So it's a combination of things. I think right now, cost of production, obviously inflation, all of those things have caused a perfect storm, if you like. But it's the industry, it does go through different different times in terms of the amount of work around, but I think at the moment everyone in the industry probably recognises this is a really challenging time right now.
And yet there are some people in the industry who do phenomenally well. It's a very unequal industry, isn't it? A bit like, you know, my experience of television, and on this committee we got the publication of presenters' salaries, and it showed a huge gulf with some people being paid enormous salaries, surprisingly large salaries for the talent levels, but big gender pay gap, shortage of BAME people at the top levels, some people doing eye-wateringly well and some people just doing really badly.
I mean, that's a fact, yes. And I mean, certainly from my perspective, I would like to see measures that rebalance that dynamic.
How? Tell me.
So I think there are ways for the industry to come together and look at how it better supports its freelance workforce consistently, so not just when we're in the boom times of 2022.
Give us some examples of how you do that.
Well, I think the industry could set up a fund which could support people through times when they're not able to work. At the moment, what happens is, thankfully, we've got the Film and TV charity there who have doled out millions of pounds to freelancers who literally cannot pay their bills in crisis loans. And I think, given the economic importance of this industry to the UK economy, how can it be right that the workforce have to rely on charitable...
How would you make that work? If you're looking at 7 out of 10 people not working, you'd need a huge fund to provide those people with the kind of support that you're talking about.
Well, I think that from my perspective, it is about the whole industry coming together. As you said, it's a very unequal industry, so there is money around. I think there may be ways that people could contribute to a fund themselves, but also have the industry more broadly contribute to a fund that could support people in tough times. Because otherwise, you know, we've heard that there's lots of money going into skills and training, but it's a waste of money if people are just leaving at the other end. So I think industry does need to be a bit more imaginative about how it goes about supporting its workforce.
You mentioned bullying a second ago, and that's something this committee's taken an interest in the past. How would you characterise the bullying that you see in the industry? How does it manifest itself, and what can be done about it?
I mean, it's a huge problem. I think everyone recognises that it is a problem across the industry, and there has been some good work and collaboration, that word, across the industry to try and come up with ways to address that problem.
Who's getting bullied and by whom?
Probably our members are getting bullied, and they're getting bullied by people who are more senior and have more power in the industry than them.
Is it worse in your industry than it is in, I don't know, ours, politics or journalism, or how do you compare it with other aspects of national life?
I think it probably is worse, and I think that is a result of the huge power dynamics that there are in our industry. Some people are incredibly powerful. There's the project-based basis of our industry, which means that there is a lot of pressure on a particular project. People then move on somewhere else. So it is quite a pressured environment, I think we all accept. But I do think it's a particular problem across the creative industries, which is why we've been involved in and certainly welcome the creation of the Creative Industries Independent Standards Authority.
Yes, we're going to come back to talk about.
Yes, I want to ask you before I hand back to the chair. I mean, we're sitting down here writing a report. That's the purpose of this. So it's always good to get recommendations so that we move beyond the nebulous to the very specific. Because we sit down, we write a report based on what you guys tell us when you come before us, with recommendations for government to pick up on. What would you like us to include in our report that would address some of these issues in a practical way, some specific bullet points that we could include that would be helpful to to address the concerns that you raise?
First of all, I'd like to, when you asked how prevalent bullying is, in our surveys, we do a looking glass survey, which looks at the mental health of people across the industry, across film and television.
Sorry to interrupt you. We are going to come on to questions about mental health and bullying in a minute. So,
okay.
You may
hold fire on the specifics.
You may want to keep your powder dry on the specifics.
Yes, hold fire on the specifics, but give us recommendations for bullet points for us to include.
I think that what we need to do is look at don't just need to look at the people falling into pulling them out of the river. We need to look as to why they're falling in the first place. We need to go upstream to actually address the issues as to why people are leaving the industry, why the industry is not mentally healthy. Because I think that the mental health and the bullying and other things associated with that is one of the primary reasons as to why people are leaving the industry, as well as the financial problems. And so one bullet point that I would give is that the charity currently has a thing called the Whole Picture Toolkit, which is used by over 90 production companies. At least 200 productions use it. It is mandated by STV on all their productions, and it's a way of trying to make sure that productions are as mentally healthy as possible. So I would like to look at a way in which that Whole Picture Toolkit and the mentally healthy framework which we are developing is adopted universally, pan-industry, to make sure that every production uses it, and every production at its inception is thinking about the mental health of its workforce.
Sure.
Good, thank you very much. Can I just ask you both very quickly before we move on to Simon, who we haven't heard from yet? One of the recommendations that our committee made when we did our recent report on creator remuneration was to have a commissioner responsible for freelancers, in the same way that in government we have a children's commissioner and a victims commissioner. I'd like to hear the thoughts of both of you, and Philip is nodding at me in a very encouraging way, so I'm hoping that I'm going to take this as a positive. What were your thoughts on that recommendation?
Yeah, we welcomed that recommendation because I think there is a need for someone to advocate on behalf of the freelance workforce and to raise the challenges and the problems of being a freelancer in the industry. Absolutely welcome that.
Yeah. So the charity is here for everybody who works in film and television and cinema, but we disproportionately work with freelancers. Those are the people who are definitely at the sharp end. So anything in which surfaces their concerns more and make sure that their concerns are championed must be a good thing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Well, actually afternoon now. Obviously we know the industry is very prevalent to have very long hours, making it difficult for people, for example, with caring responsibilities and things like that. How can the industry, which is based around those sort of timescales, those sort of shift patterns, Marcus, basically support workers better? And is there a role for government in this?
I don't think we have to accept that production has to have long hours. There will be points in the production where there may be long hours, and there has to be when you're filming with regards to catching daylight and what have you. But the idea that we should just roll over and accept that we have to work long hours doesn't actually stand up to close scrutiny. And I know that from personal experience, and also know that from the data. So if we look at the data, freelancers on average are working 50 plus hours a week, whereas if you look at non-freelancers who are staff doing the same jobs, they're working closer to 43 hours a week. Right? And so that's why I'd really welcome the idea of somebody who is championing freelancers so that they're not exploited, to make sure that they are working the same kind of hours.
Some may want to do those extra hours, though.
Some may want to, but that's a choice. And if it's a choice that then that's absolutely fine. My personal experience is that I worked at the BBC for 24 years. I was working in current affairs and documentaries in London, and they worked far longer hours than when I worked in current affairs in BBC Scotland. And when I first went up there, I was used to the long hour culture, and I thought it was a necessity to make award-winning programmes. I went up to Scotland, and I found out that I was able to make more award-winning programmes working shorter hours with better management.
You're here.
And so I'm just saying, sometimes we accept a culture without really questioning if it's absolutely necessary. So that's my own personal experience, and I said the data shows.
It's a good point. I mean, it depends on resources as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I mean, I worked on a breakfast show in local radio in the BBC, which had half the staff of the neighbouring breakfast show. So, of course, I had to work longer hours as a result of that, despite the fact I asked for more resources. But that's not the point really here. Is there a role for government, do you think, in this to make sure that people aren't taken advantage of in that way?
With regards to working hours? I would have thought so. I haven't actually given it that much thought, if I'm being completely honest. And I think with regards to working hours, again, I would defer to Bectu, who I know have done a specific paper, which we supported, on working hour practices.
Okay. Same question to you then, Philippa. Is there a way that government can play a role here?
I mean, I think definitely it's a challenge for the industry, and I agree with Marcus actually that just working long hours, I think it's a cultural thing. It's not actually a necessity, and we did this really good. Our project in Scotland did this really good piece of work. We're working with the BBC and others around how you could have a production which operated on much shorter working hours, and I think the next stage in that is to actually do that on a production and see actually whether it is more costly or whether in fact it's more efficient because people aren't quite so tired and stressed. Have government got a role to play? I mean, I think definitely government has got a role to play in terms of making sure that good work happens across all sectors, and I think sometimes our sector, our industry, does think that it's got a pass on some of those things, quite frankly, that actually because of the cost of production, all of those sorts of things, that actually they can push people to work harder, longer, and in more stressful conditions. So I think, yes, all of the things that happen in other industries could happen in our industry. Job sharing could happen in our industry much more. Shorter working hours could happen in our industry much more.
Marcus?
Having had a chance to think about it, I think possibly we need to think about the role that Ofcom plays in this. So Ofcom collects data on diversity, and it publishes that data, and it's incredibly useful to see how things are progressing by the different broadcasters. And so there may be a role that Ofcom could play with regards to collecting data on working hours. If the broadcasters were asked certain news productions, for example, to do that. So there might be a role, as I'm not sure about government, but there might be a role for Ofcom.
Good point. One of the concerns, and playing devil's advocate here, is that reducing working hours, lengthened schedules could impose extra costs on production. That makes us as a country perhaps less competitive with others. What are your concerns around that, Marcus, to start with?
Well, my experience of working in documentaries and current affairs in BBC London and working in documentaries and current affairs in BBC Scotland is that I was making the same award-winning programmes, winning BAFTAs and RTS.
The BBC is slightly different because of the way the BBC is funded. But if we look at the commercial sector, there could be a problem
But
here.
I would say the beauty of being able to compare one BBC department to another BBC department is I'm looking at like with like.
Of course.
And what I'm doing there is that the like with like was that I was actually working on a smaller budget in BBC Scotland. So we were able to reduce our working hours and have a smaller budget and still make award-winning programmes.
You were somewhat shielded from commercial activity being in a BBC.
Absolutely, but if you're trying to compare like with like, which I would say that's a good one to look at. So I think the work that Bectu has done is really important, and I think the next step is then to roll out to actually test that hypothesis to see whether it's does have a negative impact.
Philippa, do you think it could put off inward investment and investors in shooting in the UK if, for example, we were going to reduce working hours and all those sorts of things?
No, because I think I'm absolutely convinced that by working smarter, actually the industry could still produce great films and TV dramas, but just treating people slightly better through the process. As was mentioned earlier, you know, the skills of the crew in the UK it attracts that inward investment, as well as our fantastic studio space, all of those things. So I think working smarter, planning better, all of those things could still happen on shorter hours.
Okay. Moving on to mental health, if I may. I don't want to talk about bullying because my colleague Damien will go on to speak about that in a moment. But Marcus, your evidence to this committee outlines a mental health crisis in the industry. What do you think is behind that? What changes to working practices are required to help alleviate this? And how quickly would you like that to be implemented?
There are several things that are behind it. I think that we're talking about working hours for one. Mm-hmm. We're talking about bullying, which we'll go on to. We're talking about highly pressured environments. We're talking about a culture which sometimes doesn't recognise the problems of mental health. And, the stats are really stark with regards to 77% of respondents to our survey showed that people do not think that the film and TV industry is a industry which has a healthy working environment. The good news, because I realise that I'm talking a lot of bad news, but the good news is that the feedback that we've had of people using the whole picture toolkit, shows that it's absolutely positive, that it has a direct result in people having better mental health environment to work in, which is why it's absolutely fantastic that so many productions have taken it on. We have a mental health task force which involves all the major broadcasters and many of the streamers, and hearing that STV, for one example, mandating the mental health toolkit shows that many of them are taking it seriously, and I think you can literally have a positive effect tomorrow if a production takes on board and thinks about mental health from the very start, from its inception.
Anything you'd like to add, Philippa?
I think all of the things that we've talked about contribute to the mental health crisis. So people working long hours is obviously potentially harmful to physical health, but also to mental health. So things like bullying and harassment contribute to that. So yes, I think it is a particular problem for the industry, and our research shows that the mental health challenges increase at a time like now when people just don't have work and don't know where their next work is coming from. They're isolated and they are worried about their financial futures.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And finally, Damien.
Thank you. I'm struck that we've had evidence session after evidence session where people say we're good at this industry. It's one of our internationally best industries. The government recognise that as well. And even more surprisingly, it's awash with money. It's just spending that money more effectively to attract more people in. And loads of young people, not just young people, loads of young people want to get into it. And also, people want to take mid-career breaks to get into it, because we've heard this morning, you can be an accountant at an insurance company. It might be more fun to be an accountant in a film company. So why wouldn't you do that? So there's this tremendous demand to get into the industry, and yet from what you're saying, if you're freelance, you'll spend a lot of your time unemployed. Staff jobs are going, and all the major broadcasters, and if you do manage to get a job, you'll get bullied and have mental health problems. There's cognitive dissonance here. Which is true? Is this an attractive industry or not?
I think the acid test that I apply is I ask people whether they would recommend their children going into the industry. And over the last 7 to 8 months, I've yet to get a positive response of people saying, yes, I would encourage my child to go into the industry. The response is normally, it is a creative industry, so I would encourage them exactly the same way that if they were an artist or if they're a musician, that if they want to express their creativity. But as a profession, most people, not most, all the people I've spoken to anecdotally have not recommended that their children should go into that go into the
So
film and
you say
television
that's happened in the last 7 to 8 months? Because, of course, traditionally, you absolutely would have encouraged your children to go into that industry.
The reason I say 7 to 8 months is because I've been CEO for 7 to 8 months. So I didn't ask that question previously.
But, I mean, you must have considered that question previously. Is this an industry you would recommend young people to go into? And, you know, we've heard from youngish people who, when they were young, were desperate to get into it.
I think young people are still desperate to get into it because it's a really interesting industry. At the same time, I think that I would not have been able to, coming from the background that I come from, with not having the bank of mum and dad in the same way, that I would be able to sustain at least the early part of my career, and early part meaning the first 10 years of my career, if I entered the industry now.
Yeah. So again, we surveyed people back in September at the height of the strikes, and 24% said they were considering or planning to leave the industry within the next 5 years. And in February, that figure had risen to 37%. So I think there's a real challenge around turnover and people just getting burnt out, and the precarious nature of the industry, meaning specifically if you're black, if you're a woman, or if you come from a lower socioeconomic background, that, you know, during these periods where you literally cannot financially sustain yourself, then you are going to look elsewhere, and you're going to think that there is a better life for you outside of the industry. And I think that's the huge challenge, because yes, I agree with you, it's a very exciting industry. It should be a really rewarding industry, and people should be able to be productive in this industry without facing all of the challenges we've talked about this morning.
Is it more precarious now than it was 10 years ago?
I think it is, yeah. I think it probably is. As I said, it is an industry which goes through these sort of phases of being, particularly lots of work out there. I think 2022 was a particular boom year. But yes, I think at the moment it is incredibly difficult for the workforce.
I'll give you just one anecdote on that. We, at the charity, we give out hardship grants, and on average, it's roughly £300,000 a year that we give out in total in hardship grants. Last year, we gave out $1 million, right? And part of that was due to the actors' strike, but our year-on-year new normal, if you look at month-on-month, is now double what it was previously. So if that's an indication of how much more people are suffering, or how much more precarious people's finances are, I think that it's evidence that we are definitely living in a different circumstance than we were a few years ago.
I mean, the general impression I got was that, of course, there are these huge peaks and troughs, but it's peaks and troughs with a rising trend, that there's more activity and therefore more work. Is that not the case?
Only yesterday, Philippa and I were at another industry discussion, and the discussion there was, is this cyclical, or is this structural? And I would say that most people thought that there was a structural element to the downturn, and it's not just purely cyclical. So they do think that something structurally has happened.
What's happened structurally?
Whether advertising revenue has left, whether those and gone to other platforms, so whether ITV, Channel 4, etc., have got the same finances as they had, with regards to the streamers, whether they're from what was a boom with regards to streamers of trying to get as many subscribers as possible, so throwing money at trying to get subscribers, whether there's now a reassessment and with regards to those streaming models, and so they're actually contracting and consolidating. So there is a possible financial reckoning and restructure, both for the financial models for the broadcasters, for the PSBs, and with regards to the international streamers.
I mean, I get the point about the streamers, and I think everyone expects there won't be as many in 5 years' time as there are now. Though there might still be, there's much more production going on than there was 10 years ago, simply because the streamers didn't exist 10 years ago, and even when they consolidate, there'll probably be more. But surely the point about, the advertising revenue, I get the point about linear advertising is going down, but presumably companies still have products to advertise. They will advertise them in different media in different ways. So those jobs in some form ought to be still there.
They will advertise them on different mediums, but maybe not on different media. So you only have to talk to newspapers, and their advertising model has completely changed, and they talk about having to have internet pennies versus print pounds, with regards to that. So the idea that and journalism is definitely, print journalism is definitely suffering and has been for the last, I would say, 20 years with regards to the change in how the advertising works. So, it doesn't come as a massive shock to see that where advertising goes doesn't mean that the jobs necessarily follow.
I suppose you can look at some factual things. Does Bectu have more members now than it did 5 years ago?
Yes.
And do you expect to have more members in 5 years' time than you have now?
I'm not sure, actually. So I tend to think that at the moment we are facing a bit of a reset more generally, that there are bigger challenges for broadcasters and also studios, actually, and where investment will go remains to be seen a bit, I think. So yes, of course, I would hope to have more members in 5 years' time because of the work that we do, but whether or not we'll see the continued increase of investment, I'm not sure.
One last specific one on bullying. We've seen all the figures. Is that worse than other industries? Is the data collected in the same way in other industries?
I'm not sure. I know our stats say that 33% of people working in film and television have experienced bullying, and I think that's in the last year alone leading up to that survey. So I don't know what bullying is like in other industries. I don't work in other industries, but that's something I could look at and feed back to you.
It's a genuine question, because I'm not conscious that other industries collect this type of data, and it makes me my ignorance about that, but it would be interesting to know that. Anyway, sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Damien. Can I just quickly go back on the bullying harassment issue? Philip, you mentioned CISA earlier. To what extent are you getting the sense that the industry is buying into CISA and are sort of genuinely behind it?
I certainly hope they are. The noises that I've heard and the conversations that I've had would suggest that the industry is getting behind it. I guess the proof will be in the pudding, and when people are asked to cough up money to make CISA happen, we'll see whether that is a real commitment, a real and lasting commitment, or whether it's just warm words. But I think there's still a lot of development work to be done around how CISA will operate in practice. But I certainly see it as being part of the infrastructure to try and address this problem in the industry.
So some companies have articulated to us that they feel they don't need to work in partnership with an independent body like CISA because they have their own systems to tackle bullying and harassment. How would you respond to that?
I would respond by saying that certainly the people that we represent as freelancers don't feel that those systems are robust enough, or that they have actually dealt with the problems that we've seen across the industry. So I certainly take the view that an independent body is likely to gain more confidence. I think our members have told us that. And they are telling us that they see a need for an independent look at this problem and not for people to mark their own homework.
A pan-industry, something that effectively is able, for an organisation, that for an industry that employs so many freelancers, something that's able to straddle across a whole range of different companies in an independent way. Okay, yeah. Good. Finally, guys, thank you so much for your time and your patience with us today. I had the same question as we concluded the other panel before. Was there anything that we should have asked you, or any other points that you felt that you wanted to make that will be meaningful in supporting the report that we come up with? Philippa? I
just wanted to talk about tax incentives and the challenge around diversity and inclusion in the industry. So I think that there have been suggestions before that those incentives should be linked to ensuring diversity, abiding by the standards that the industry has set in terms of what a diverse production should look like.
You'd use the tax credits, tax relief system to boost recruitment from people from a range of different backgrounds.
Definitely. I definitely think money talks, and I think there's been lots of warm words about diversity and inclusion, but we see at a time like now when things are really challenging that all of those good intentions go out the window.
Thank you. Marcus?
I would second the idea of using tax incentives to incentivise best practice. That definitely with regards to diversity and inclusion, but also with regards to incentivising good mental health practice as well. So while it's absolutely fantastic that so many productions have taken on board our mental health, whole picture mental health toolkit, and looking at a mental health framework to address these issues, I think that if there was a way to incentivise that, would be absolutely fantastic. I think the diversity issue is a massive issue. I know that Baroness Villa Benjamin talked about it, making sure that the current crisis does not disproportionately hit women, people of colour, disabled people, other people from protected characteristics, etc. And I think there was a real fear of people that I speak to from those protected characteristics that they will disproportionately feel the brunt of it. And two very high profile executives, one in the streamers, one in a public service broadcaster, have recently, due to restructures, lost their jobs. Now hopefully that is a restructure, and that doesn't mean that there's any diminishing in the commitment of the broadcaster or the streamer in question to the idea of diversity and inclusion. But it is a worrying sign when, as I said, in roughly about a month, just as they're also making savings, that some of these really important roles seem to be being lost.
Very good. Thank you both so much for appearing in front of us today. Order.